But yeah, so we want to have an open discussion today. These are very casual in nature. Um, and we try to bring somebody who really knows their stuff. In a couple of weeks, we got Margot, who's on the call now, going to be talking about some of the cool stuff that she's been able to do on the Pendo side of things there. But today we've got our good friend Chad Horenfeldt, who many of you probably know. And if you don't, you should know him. He's a fixture in the customer success world. He's now with an AI native company called Avoca. And we're going to be talking about this whole idea of forward deployed engineers. Um, I've had more people come to me and say, I cannot wait for this session because I think a lot of folks are hearing about this topic of forward deployed engineers from their boards, from their executive teams. They're seeing it all over LinkedIn. What is it? How does it work? How's it different than what we've been doing or what we're trying to do now? And so Chad is living and breathing this as we speak. And so excited to share some of these details with you and just have a really good discussion to unpack it and also to hear as you all interact here, like share in the comments what you're thinking and put questions in here and we'll try to get to those as well. Um, this is brought to you by Balboa. Balboa is a solutions provider in the Pendo ecosystem. We've been around for a couple of years now, and we've done business with some of Pendo's largest clients, helping them make uh, better use and getting more business value out of Pendo. So, if you want to learn more about that or the work that we do, or you have Pendo and you're looking to get more out of it, give us a buzz. We're happy to chat with you about that. But let me go ahead and introduce Chad. So, Chad, first and foremost, you should know he's an author. He just published a book called The Strategic Customer Success Manager. And, Chad, I'm always so impressed with people who can actually sit down and get a book out. And so, kudos to you on that. Would encourage everybody to go check it out. Amazon, I assume, is probably the place to go. Chad's been a fixture in the customer success space for a while. Chad, I don't know when the first time you and I met was, probably at a conference years and years ago. But Chad's really a thought leader in this space and is helping transform it even as we speak, which we'll dive into here in a minute. I run Balboa, as I just mentioned. Also used to run a community called Gain, Grow, Retain, which is how I met many of you on this call. Former chief customer officer and director of product management, and, just go path of a career. So, but anyway, today excited to talk about this idea of forward deployed engineers and where we're going with that. So Chad, without any further ado, let's jump right into it. But maybe
Sure.
before we go too deep into the topic, just tell us a little bit about sort of what Avoca does. Who are the target customers and what's the value proposition of the company, just to ground everybody in what you all are doing today.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Jay, thank you so much for having me on here. I really respect everything that you do, and great to chat about this. So, a little bit more about Avoca. So, Avoca is the AI platform for the service trades, and it goes like well beyond that. And essentially, like if you're trying to get someone to fix your air conditioning or your heating, you'd call someone or text someone, and you'd pray that they call you back, or maybe you'd get through to someone and they don't know necessarily your problem. And so what we've done is we've created these AI agents that essentially respond to customers. And whether our primary product is voice AI. And so they're literally, you have someone that's on the call, taking your appointment, booking it into a system, and then having someone go out there and fix whatever it is that you need or install whatever it is that you need. And we're just taking that and we're expanding across many different verticals. So very exciting, and it extends into marketing as well. Like if you're finding someone on Google or whatever, and you call them up, and we can like help schedule that appointment. So very interesting area, and we have customers that are very tiny. We have customers that are you know huge, humongous. Like there's a lot of PE investment in this area, and so PE firms are buying up these local businesses. And so what that requires is a very unique approach to customer success, and just go to market in general, because you have an ever evolving industry. You have a new area that's, I'd say, newer to AI. And there's a lot of education that's required there. And then you have, because you're expanding across different verticals, the tech stack itself is changing so rapidly, where you're integrating with many different new systems. And this goes beyond, the prompting and the AI component of it as well. And so that's sort of where we kind of get into having a very unique approach to how we service our customers. And the fundamental, I'd say, approach and one of our competitive differentiators is we literally can take on anything and do anything when it comes to this area, meaning we can integrate with anything, we can take any different requirement and build out a very customized solution, and do that quickly and with high quality. And I think that's really where we've differentiated ourselves and we've made a name for ourselves, and we're growing extremely rapidly.
That's awesome. And as somebody who lives in Charleston, South Carolina, I know from firsthand that when I need my air conditioner fixed, I want that to be done quickly. I want to be
Yes.
able to get in touch with somebody. So appreciate what you guys are doing. So I think Avoca you would think of as an AI native company. Is that maybe a fair moniker? It's something that you
Yes,
use in
a hundred
describing
percent,
the
a
business?
hundred percent, because the base technology is all around AI. And so, again, like we have these AI personas and AI agents that respond to customers both from a text perspective, voice perspective, other channels that are always emerging. But yes, like it is a completely AI native, and even how we interact, our teams interact, how I interact. I use, all sorts of different AI technologies to automate things, to speed them up, and to create greater efficiencies.
So when we say the words AI native, a lot of folks calling in are with companies that maybe came from what we would maybe say is traditional SaaS today, right? Versus AI native. But help me understand a little bit more. Like when we say AI native, is it the technology that's different? Is it the fact that the company's growing at 100, 200, 300, 500% a year versus not? Is it the pricing model that's different? Like what makes a company AI native versus maybe a historical SaaS company?
Yeah, so this is my second AI native company. I kind of jumped in early because I could see where things were going, and it just like how it's just completely changing businesses and how people operate. My first one was around CX, which I know that area very well, and when it comes to support. And so I think fundamentally it's the product. It's not an add-on product. This is your core product. Like we are an AI platform for the trade. So we're not this SaaS platform that adds, AI into it. We were started with AI, and that's kind of how we've grown. In fact, we've built on more SaaS components, on top, which is like it's the SaaS part. Some of the SaaS part, traditional SaaS, like an add-on. So I think that's one part of it. I think the second part is how your business operates. Like, are your individuals using AI in their day-to-day processes and in their day-to-day, I guess routines and habits. And I would say that we are. Like, I think that one of the reasons that I was brought on was not just from my experience in CS, but coming from an AI native company, my last company was phenomenal in the sense that it really ingrained into me that I really have to be working differently and thinking differently. Bringing up an Excel and doing a pivot table and all, and like that's great, but like you should be doing those things way more efficiently. Your day-to-day tasks, everything should be streamlined. And so that's the mentality that I brought in. And I think it's been helpful because it inspires everyone to be thinking to be doing it that way as well. But even for our TAMs and our IMs, they're using Cursor, they're using Claude, they're evaluating, let's say, call transcripts en masse to determine where the quality issues are. And they're using like AI to do that. And so we've really like infused into the culture that you should be thinking and leveraging AI to, again, increase efficiency, make yourself more effective. And then I think the
Yeah.
third one maybe I haven't talked about is pricing. And so I think pricing changes. There's more of an outcome approach to pricing. We're on the cusp of that. I'd say we're still more of a consumption-based approach, but consumption-based is still very like advanced when it comes to traditional SaaS that's based on seats.
Yeah.
So there's a different way of thinking there as well. And it does lend to more outcome-based approach. And I'd say in some ways it makes it easier. In some ways it makes it more difficult. If you're in a competitive environment, you're really proving your lunch like every day. And the metrics are much more tangible, and much more in the face. There's less touchy-feely. Like it's like, did you accomplish that or did you not accomplish that? It makes it exciting, I'd say. And it makes CS much, much more impactful.
It's interesting that you talk about outcomes, and I've been thinking a lot about that. We've talked a lot about outcomes in the CS world, customer success world, forever, right? And I think typically we think about outcomes in terms of business outcomes. Like somehow I'm helping you improve your revenue. I'm helping you drive costs down, improve customer retention in some way, or cross-selling to It's like a big P&L type of outcome, right? That I can point to, which is really more ROI. But the way I've started to think about outcomes is a little bit more in the micro. Like, hey, you've got a job that's got to be done 100 times a day. That's an outcome too. At least all those other things, the quality of that result and the efficiency with which I can do it for you are really important. So it might be responding to an inbound inquiry. Has your thinking around outcomes sort of changed in any way relative to what
I'd
you're
say
doing
it's
at
interesting.
Avoca?
I would say it hasn't, and the same approach that I talk about in the book around outcomes. It doesn't change if it's SaaS or it doesn't ch if it's this native AI company. There's a question about do we do business reviews, and like when I joined, sales is way out in front of post sales, and so I'm really rebuilding and building, not rebuilding, I'm building our CS motion. And so we do business reviews. We're doing them right now with our enterprise, but we're building that down, and we're starting to push that down, and think about how we can be more effective in terms of showing customers like, hey, like here's the value you're achieving. But if I break down outcomes, similar to what you said, like an outcome, I look at it from a business outcome. It's you're generating revenue, you're saving money, you're creating efficiency. Let's say you're improving employee retention. Like it's those top level items. And what I found is that it doesn't matter if I was like my last company where we were deflecting tickets, like we were answering tickets, and that was like saving money because you could reduce the amount of service reps that you had. And in this company, it's somewhat similar because there's service reps that were answering phones. And if we're improving the booking rate for our customers, we're getting them more jobs, that's generating more revenue. And then we're looking at like, what are the efficiencies and how do we compare against human reps? And it's not necessarily to displace those people, it's to put them onto different jobs that they can be doing. And so we leverage, what humans are doing versus what AI can do. And then that cascades down because then we talk about the metrics. So I talk about booking rate is like really important. How do we improve the booking rate? Because booking rate will mean typically more money, and more jobs. And then when you cascade down from that, it's like, okay, how are you improving the booking rate? What are ways that you're refining how the AI responds to the customer? And what are some additional things that you're doing? So as an example, let's say you called in to book for your air conditioning because your air conditioning went out, and you're like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to go with you. Like, maybe your service fees are a little high. And so then you hang up and maybe you're going to call somebody else. So what we can do is we can do a text reach back where we have you in our system and we're going to text you and say, oh, by the way, just so you know, like we're offering like, a service fee. We know you're a loyal customer and just want to make sure you're aware of this deal. So that can help get them back on a call and like increase their booking rate. But that's part of what CS needs to do because we have to implement these best practices. And so I look at the high level outcome, business outcome. What are the key metrics you're trying to track? And then what are those specific goals that will help you achieve that? And maybe the micro item that you mentioned is those smaller level goals. But ultimately, when we're dealing with these like large PE firms, they're like, okay, how are you making me money? How are you saving me money? And we have to be
Yeah.
laser focused on that.
Yeah, that's so good. I love this example. I like the business that you're in because everybody can relate to this and understand it, right? I mean, it's very simple and straightforward. Um, okay, cool. So I know that you've recently, explained some of the changes that you've made and how you've structured your organization to support all the things that you've alluded to so far. But maybe tell us about the structure that you have in place today, just generally like what are the roles? Where do they sit within the organization? And what are they responsible for? Because I think this is the piece we want to dig into. Then I want to, down the line here in a few minutes, go into like the decision process of how you decided to go in this direction. So, but first, like lay it out for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very I'd say emerging organization because when I started, the CS organization consisted of CSMs and TAMs, and it was like one group. They were kind of doing everything. We had FDEs over here, and another group rolling into engineering, and then we had a support group that was also assisting with implementations as well. And I think that one of the things that's different than native AI companies um, is that it's not just your core engineering team that's deploying code. You have multiple groups that are deploying code. So our support team, our engineers, they're deploying code, our FDEs are deploying code. But let's kind of focus, let's come back to that, like focusing on the CS team. And so what I did with the CS team is I realized that we have to be more technical. It's because um, things are emerging so fast and they're changing so fast that just have to be more technical in general. And so what that means is people that could take the requirements and customize prompts for customers, people that can take the requirements and determine, okay, we need to integrate with this CRM. Here's the fields that we need to integrate. Here are the requirements that are needed in order for, let's say, a lead to come through Google, come through our system, and for us to send them a text message and then to book that call. And so your CSMs essentially are becoming product managers, and they're also making customizations on the fly. And so I said, okay, let's call this group TAMs. We had TAMs already, and they were morphing to more technical account managers. Let's call them TAMs. And they're not only responsible for making sure the customers are getting value, but they're also doing some of those let's say changes on the fly. And then what I created was a delivery team because I wanted to separate out the value realization and the team that's actually going to start to onboard customers. And the idea there was let's create consistency. Let's break down the whole like sausage creation engine. And so that way we can better I'd say improve the specific components, create more standardization, and then that can help us scale and grow. And so we built out this delivery team, and then we have this technical account management team, and now we're building out the different parts of the customer journey. But the other, I'd say, major overall change that we're on is to become more proactive and to be these strategic advisors for our customers. And in order for us to do that, we have to improve our support team. So our support team, is made up, as I mentioned, of engineers, and I'm reconstructing our support team so that we focus not just we want the engineering component, but we want to have different layers to that. So, like let's say a triage is the first layer. The second one is maybe a traditional support engineer. And the third one is more of that, like an engineer that can either build and implement bug fixes or can put new features in place or to do really complex triaging. And then also to implement, whatever AI triaging as part of that. And that way, we've covered these different bases. And then the other kind of path we're on is different approach based on segmentation. So that's kind of the overall approach. And then where the FDEs sit, whether they are unofficially part of CS, so they join all of our meetings, but they officially roll up into engineering. And that might change over time. But I would say that they're probably the most important group in the organization. And they interact with all different aspects and customers. So that hopefully gives you a nice little overview of the team.
Yeah, let me clarify a couple of things here just to make sure I understand. So, delivery team, when you say delivery team, is that more of the onboarding kind of motion?
Yes. It's like implementation. Yeah, delivery and implementation. And
Okay.
the idea there is that they would take customers from when sales closes and they would implement the customer, get them to a certain spot. And we sell multiple products. So and then of course with different segments, they actually might stay on where they're continuously implementing because we expand to multiple locations. And then at the enterprise level, we might bring a TAM in to manage the existing state of the business while the delivery team continues to roll out new products and new locations.
Okay, cool. So you've got the TAM team today. You've got the delivery team, which is mostly new customer and new product onboarding and new location onboarding. You've got the support organization, which feels sort of like a traditional support kind of function, except maybe a little bit more, maybe the ability to fix things in production,
Yes.
deliver code into production. And then you've got
Yes.
the FDEs. as a fourth component there, unofficially part of your organization.
Yes.
So, all right. So, talk to me a little bit more about you decided to go from CSM to TAM. Is that sort of just a naming thing? Did it help you change the way, like the recruiting profile for that role, the kind of people you were attracting to it? What were the reasons that you sort of shifted that role, and what is fundamentally different about the TAM than it is from the CSM?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I did it deliberately, and some people were like, "Hey, like if you do that, you might not get the CSM candidates, and you might not get the volume." But it was the opposite. Like we've got a lot of volume, but it was more important that I distinguish that what we're looking for. We're looking for people that are more technically adept, and so they can take a prompt and they can break the prompt down and try and figure out what the problem is, and then they can make a change to that prompt to improve it. And we're not looking for people that are like using AI to summarize their meeting notes and send a communication out to customers. We're also not necessarily looking for the commercial mindset in the sense of like, hey, I see what you're doing. I'm going to negotiate an upsell for you. So that account management component sits within the sales team, and that was deliberate because to be honest, like we're so overwhelmed by what we need to do within CS to drive, first of all, to onboard customers. And then in terms of the value realization, there's so many different components of that we have to focus on and optimization and adoption because again, it's a very new technology and also it's changing so rapidly. I mean, we've
Yeah,
recently come out with newer voices that I've played this for my mother-in-law and she had no idea that it was AI taking that call. She actually asked, she's like, hey, is that person there on your team? I'm like, well, kind of, because they're AI. But
wow.
we're like upgrading our customers and making tweaks so fast. And that's why we needed the TAM and how we've sort of separated out the different roles. And we don't have this all figured out. There is overlap and I've had to hire significantly to get us into the right spot. And now I'd say we're doing more specialization into specific roles, like an implementation engineer to help the implementation managers. And that person can focus more on, let's say, complex prompts. Um, I know there was one question, and this comes up a lot. It's like, well, what's the difference between a technical account manager and an FDE? Um,
Yeah,
there's also lots of questions around, well, like FDEs are just like professional services. And there are a lot of similarities there between like a really technical solutions manager or whatever you call them in the professional services. But I'd say the difference with our FDEs are, and we are very meticulous in how we hire FDEs, is that they're not just changing and reconfiguring items within your application, within your UI. And they're not just like, let's say, putting a webhook in place or something to that effect and setting up like an API integration. They're literally building the integration. They're literally deploying code. And I think that's a huge, huge change because traditionally it was the engineering team. The engineering team's over here. There's a feature request. Okay, it goes through like Linear or Jira, goes up to the engineering team, and product evaluates it, and they determine and they roll it out. And here, our FDEs are literally deploying code to their master code base, and there's code flying all over the place. And that's another native AI thing. We have our deployed engineers changing
yeah,
the interface, fixing things. We have our engineering team, core engineering team with their roadmap, and then we have our FDEs. And then with the FDEs, they can literally be sitting in a meeting with a customer and gathering their requirements and then building out their features and functionality. And I'd say that when I've come in, um, um, I've changed things where we had FDEs like managing customers, and I was like, okay, no, like that they should not be doing that. And it's not that some of them can't do that, but they're not going to be the most they're really focusing on more on the technology part and the requirements part, where I need to make sure that someone's keeping everybody on track. And so that's on the implementation side, implementation managers, part of delivery. And then on the technical account management part, making sure that we're getting value, achieving value, we understand what value means, and then we're selling that value, we're communicating that value to the right stakeholders. And so that way everyone can play their different roles and do it effectively. Again, we're in the midst of getting that. I've hired leaders that are actually joining me very soon in terms of a head of support and in terms of a head of delivery. And I'm actively hiring right now for a director of customer success to manage the TAM team. And so again, this is very, very rapid growth. I've been with the company now just over 4 months. And I've hired significantly and been putting in all these different infrastructure processes and people and technology in place. But I feel that this is the right approach in terms of how we do things. And if it's not, then we will adjust. But right now, I've already started to measure our time to value, and by putting the implementation team's time to value has already decreased. And then where our engagement level with customers has gone up, and our other metrics are solid where they need to be, and I'm looking at who's managing which customers. So I think the numbers are trending in the right direction, and it's a matter of just continuously like putting these things into place.
I I've always been a big fan of having some specialization because there's a much different skill set required to manage a client to the end of a project than there is to actually do the configuration in the product. And even now, like to sort of build out some of the more technical components of the product behind the implementation, right? So I think a lot of folks, including me, are probably going to be happy to hear that, yeah, it's not just one role that you deploy to do everything for the client. There's still some specialization that needs to be there. The other comment about this, like the FDE role as it was originally envisioned by Palantir, who sort of pioneered this a decade ago, was 20% sales, 30% product, like product management kind of mindset, and 50% engineering. I think the thing, and you validate this for me or invalidate it, is but the thing that strikes me is the FDE should be creating IP as part of their work, IP that the company is then reselling in some way to make the product more valuable.
Yeah, there's like 100% in terms of what you're saying, and I think that like in terms of the traditional Palantir, like how they did things, and I think they are aligned. Like, and it comes to IP, I mean the work that our forward deployed engineers are doing is phenomenal. They're improving the product. They're actually simplifying the onboarding process. They're directly involved in not only working with customers, but working, with our core engineering team and on our particular products. Because the other thing too is that you have to think about what does that individual want. That individual like has not just wanting to work on customer projects, but they also want to improve their own technical skills and technical abilities. But I think you have to look at each individual FTE and determine like where are some of their strengths and better utilize them. Some of them actually they move on to different roles. They may move on to the core engineering team. May move on to product management. And it's just like every company, you just have to have like different career paths. There's some good questions here as well. Like one question is around measurement and goals. And so those are emerging very quickly. We obviously need them, but it was again, it's like such a crazy growth path. But on the time to value, I'm somewhat cheating right now, where there's a time to live, and by time to live, it's definitely equates to time to value because we look at certain metrics like have they achieved X number of calls? Have they achieved X or Y number of booking rate, as an example? And so our goal there is to make sure that they're achieving value before we hand that off. Sometimes we'll get them to a certain state, and then the IM will hold on to the customer for a little bit before we transition it. But we're still sort of working through there. On the TAM side, and just in general, we're all measured on retention. And so I'm looking very closely at retention. And then there are metrics around growth. And it's not just growth in terms of, did we surface that opportunity? We also looked at, like, did we actually implement that closed deal? And so that's kind of one of the things that we've recently changed in terms of how we compensate individuals. Like, we don't want to necessarily just throw out, like, hey, like, we closed this deal, because in fact, we don't charge our customers until we actually implement them on that product. And so we want to make sure that, we
Yeah.
compensate appropriately.
Yeah, that's a really good forcing function, right? Is to say, hey, look, it's a good go-to-market move, but it's also a good forcing function to drive to the outcome generating deployment of the technology. So that's very cool. All right, let's do get to a few of these questions in here. There's a question about let me get back to it here. Like how did they're saying CSM, the person asking this question is saying CSM, but it's really the TAM, right? Which is your core role in the CS org now. How did the TAM and the FDE interact? And my question on top of that is does every customer get assigned an FDE in addition to their TAM at some point? How does the assignment of FDEs actually play out?
Yeah, so the FDEs are very much focused on our enterprise customers because those are the ones that are going to require the most customization. And, just also from a cost perspective, like, these are elite like people that, and we have to, use them in the best way possible. And in terms of the different roles, when it comes to a TAM versus an FDE, so the TAM is managing the overall relationship. They're making sure that whatever the customer's outcomes are, that we're on the right track to help achieve that. And then the FDE is working alongside the TAM to either implement the right configurations, pull the right data to help prove out that analysis. Sometimes those lines are blurry, which is okay. It's a matter of like for each of those individual situations, are we doing the things that are necessary to get to the customer into the right place? Again, it's very fast and furious in this native AI world. And so, just as an example, like there's a feature that hasn't been built yet. Maybe it's how we transfer calls between the AI and humans. We want to, it's a new like let's say it's a new call technology like dial pad like we haven't worked with before, and the FD will literally build that whatever that connection is out overnight and have it ready the next day. Where again, like something in the traditional like SaaS world is like, oh, we got to put that into the roadmap. How many customers want
Yeah,
that, et cetera, et cetera. It's just completely blows that out. And another time where let's say a business review needs to be done, customers like landed in town. They're like, oh, they want to meet up with us in New York. Well, the FDE may pull together all the data and put together the business review and work with the TAM in terms of presenting that. And so it's very, very fluid. And I want to create more consistency there, but I also don't want to go against the culture of the company, which is a massive amount of empowerment. Everybody is empowered to do and build and do like a really great things. And I mean, even this morning, someone's like, hey, like our customer, they're looking for a French Canadian accent, because they're based in French Canada. And so this person's like, well, like I just reached out to our vendor and they have all these voices. And then I talked to our engineer, and we determined that we can use those voices. They're open source voices, but it's okay to use it and test it out. And we can implement that. And maybe that's not the permanent solution, but this is an implementation manager who is also very technical. And they implement that in literally like, whatever, 5 minutes in terms of coming up with that solution, implementing it. And now, we create a loom, and then we were like the rest of the team is now informed that they can go into this library and start using those voices and determining like, okay, what's the best thing we can do for customers? And so it's that type of innovation and empowerment that as a leader, what I'm trying to do is hire the right people, put in the right boundaries and look for where the issues are, and then direct people into the right way so that we improve there. And again, like we're going to put more layers in, and we're going to get better at the things that we do. But it's really tapping into the ingenuity of the team to maximize, how we go to market and then making sure that we're, hitting our metrics.
one of the things that these coding agents have done is put power in a lot of our hands. Some of us used to be software engineers. Some of us maybe have always dreamed of being able to do things in the product and show an idea rather than just tell an idea. And it sounds like the way that Avoca is structured, you've fully embraced that agency model that coding agents are actually giving us now. And then you're supporting it with FDEs to harden it into real product. So I think one of Ben's questions here are it sounds like, of course, the contributions that the FDEs are making or some of these folks are making are ending up back in the core product. Is that something that's tracked in any formal way in the business today?
Um, it's tracked, let's say, in our kudos channel. Um, but but like As an example, like, one of our FDEs, made improvements to our core prompts in terms of how our agents, are interacting with our customers. And that was an FDE that like basically took what existed and made improvements based on what they're seeing and what they've seen with customers and the response rates. And then that became the standard prompt that's used. And then we made future enhancements. The core engineering team used what that FDE did. I've personally, this is a second or third company. I ran a team at Bluecore about over 10 years ago that had FDEs. And they were very technical in terms of what they were doing. It was a different type of FDE where they were tapping into websites using JavaScript, putting on the websites, and then pulling that data in. But here they really have access to like the core code and are deploying code and it's up-leveled that role. And I think that that's a very hard thing for people to understand. And that's the differentiator, I'd say, between like a TAM and an FDE, and also that traditional professional services and an FDE. They are essentially part of the engineering organization. Yeah, it blows my mind, to be honest, like every day, things that I see that we do and how fast we do them.
Yeah, and I mean, you could say the same for Claude and ChatGPT and all these other harness providers around the models that are building products so fast we literally can't consume it fast enough. So that's actually it sort of dovetails with David Edelman's question here, which is who decides what gets shipped in the product? I imagine product management still has a role to play in that, but how do you keep the team educated on what's now available today that wasn't available yesterday?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. There's lots of code flying all over the place in terms of enhancements. There is like, work on, you have to balance that empowerment versus like focus. And so that's a tough one. And it's an area that I've been sort of reining in with the team. And then, sorry, the second question, I missed, what was your second question there?
The second question was like, who's deciding what actually ships in the product, and then how do you educate the team on
Oh yeah,
the
the
new
enablement part.
capabilities?
So
Yeah.
yeah, so who actually determines it? Like there's engineering squads, they determine it, and then the for deployed engineers and deployed engineers, they will come up with an idea and they'll ask for permission. They'll have a code review and they'll push things. And so we make decisions very fast there in determining like what is the right thing to do. And the enablement's a big problem. So I'll be very honest, like things are happening so fast, and so there's a big communication gap, and we try and slow down and then redo things in terms of like re-showing people like, hey, this is really important. Let's slow down here. Let's make sure everybody understands this. But it's a challenge. It's not for the faint of heart in terms of being part of these companies. And it's why we're looking for more technically minded people, because you're going to be doing a lot of these things on your own in terms of that learning and enablement. You're going to get help. Whatever help you need, you're going to get help. But a lot of it is your own sort of trial and error and trying to discern what's the best approach. That will change with
Absolutely.
time. We're just a young company that's growing very fast. And we know, like, I'm part of the delivery team. I'm going to hire like an education and enablement person. And I know on the sales side, they're looking to do that as well. So we're kind of building these things out as we go.
So, really interesting point you just made. Like, as you think about hiring for a role like that, and this is good for all of us, right? Because some of us have been around the industry for a while. Like, we're all going to have to adjust the way we work. So, how do you look at the qualifications for that role differently than you might have looked for the qualifications for someone in that training and enablement role 5 years ago? Because it's different, right? It's not just, you know,
Yeah, the first thing
design
is that
content.
like everyone at this company is like, don't wait for things to come to you. Like you have to seek them out. You have to be really curious. You have to be thinking a few steps ahead, and you just have to be very adaptive. And in SaaS, you always had to be, you had to have that adaptive mindset. But like one of the things I mentioned that TAMs are essentially product managers, and our IMs are product managers because you're thinking about products that don't exist yet. based on requirements that are coming at you from customers. And before it was like, oh, I don't know, I'm going to bring a product manager on the call, and sometimes we do that. There's no question. But a lot of times we're like, okay, that's interesting. Like, let me think about that. Let me like, work with our team here and see what we can do. And so that's the same. It goes to every role. Like, because you're thinking, like just you're thinking forward rather than and thinking like what are the possibilities rather than like what are the limitations that I have. And Also thinking about like what are the different technologies that we have. Like we always think about before we buy, what can we build? And it comes to like using Claude or using like Lovable or Vercel, like rather than just buying something that's going to sit there and not be used or it's overpriced, like how can we build that and make it actually probably better and more usable for what we need?
So good. How about traditional professional services? Can customers buy into that kind of opportunity? Do you have partners? How do you think about professional services versus your onboarding teams and your TAMs?
Yeah, so that we're built. It's a really good question. Like we're building all of that out, and then that's why I've hired a director of delivery and implementation to help build that out. We'll include partner services in there. We have a few partners that we're starting to engage with. I think one of the challenges with the native AI companies is that because things are evolving so fast, it's very hard than the traditional like certification for partners and bring them on. Excuse me, you have to go down that route, but it's just harder, and it requires getting that education team involved. So having to build those things out and very rapid development and having more organization and getting essentially more buttoned up because we're not there yet. And then that's why I'm bringing this into play. And then the other question around like, are you charging for these things and how are you charging for those? And will you charge, for FDEs? That's just another area that's like part of the delivery team that we're building out. And we have set up fees today, but a lot of our focus is on the ARR part. And the deals that we're working with, they're very significant and they have a huge growth potential. And so the focus more is on building the functionality and getting customers in terms of their outcomes and achieving those, than necessarily like, stopping. It's like, okay, well, this little thing is going to cost us like $250 an hour. This is going to be another hour. And like,
Yeah.
time you would actually put some of those things together, you would be, just it would be too late. First of all, because a competitor may have already built that out. But second of all, like it would just take too long. You have to be much more nimble. But that's not to say that that stuff's not important and will be something that we'll be implementing in the very near future. I mean, you have to. You can't continuously, grow the business that way. But we have to sort of, kind of weigh those particular items and just determine like, okay, do we build this? Do we not build this? But most of the time, like we have the capability of building, and it's stuff that other customers will benefit from. So we're going to be building.
Fantastic. Um, so Sarah, good question here. And by the way, if anybody would like to ask a question live, just go ahead and hit the raise hand button in the bottom of your Zoom chat there. We've got a few more minutes here, so we'll probably only take a couple of questions, but feel free to do that. How do you ensure that support is enabled? We sort of talked about enablement already, but how do you? This dovetails back to another question too. Is like, what is the communication bus like tactically between all these different parts of the organization that are touching the customer and having to consume all the new capabilities of the product that are coming so quickly? Like, what tools do you use? What cadences do you run? I'm just really curious about that as well.
Yeah, so it's a good question. This is we don't necessarily have this fully buttoned up, but we do use systems to track by the customer all the different changes, all the different items that come in, and so we can see a history of that. And so then we can determine, okay, like what's the best change to make here? And if we don't, then we jump on a huddle in Slack or something to that effect, and we make sure that we have the right context. We have improvements that we need to make there. One of the things I talked a little bit about, but not too much about, is people ask like, okay, where do FDEs play? The FDEs play at the enterprise. So I also mentioned that we have these deployed engineers. That's an offshore team that they do our support and they also help with implementations right now. They kind of have various different roles, and so part of me building out the support team is putting a more structured approach to overall support, and that will help with the overall communication with the other various parts of the organization. So whether that's how we better serve our customer to make sure that we have the right context, it's also like how do we create that feedback loop back to the product engineering team so that we, implement like more core functionality that needs to be implemented, because that's really, the core engineering team is thinking like larger roadmap items, and so we want to have that right feedback loop. The idea is that the support team can make, small changes and fix bugs and things like that themselves. But we also again like want to have like make sure that the whole company is aware of what some of the themes are and trends are.
Absolutely. Okay, Chad, thank you for the rapid fire there. We got about 10 minutes left. We always like to wrap these up a few minutes early. I think we've hit most of the questions here, but if anybody has another question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll have you come off mute and ask it, or put it in the chat.
There's a good
Go
question
ahead.
here about like who ultimately decides what gets built and what gets shipped, and it's a really good question. A lot of it will determine on the size of the customer, the strategic importance of the customer. When it comes to those types of companies, there's like almost like no decision that's made. It's like it's an easy decision. We're going to build that. But one of the areas is that we continuously grow into new verticals, and then we and like as people know about AI in terms of the response that you get, it's only as good as the data that's inputted into it. And so a lot of that in our business has to do with the CRM. Are we getting the right information about their customers? And then can we, serve up the right information when our agents are interacting with their end customer? And so we'll determine like, okay, if there's enough customers, then we should build that integration into that particular CRM. And then there's different flavors of what that integration is. Like, how deep do you go? Do we build it across all of our different products? Do we build it just for one product? And so, it's more of a very iterative approach in terms of how we make that decision. Part of like my job is like determining like, do we sell to those customers? Do we implement those customers? Where do I spend and expend my resources in the best way possible? It's like many organizations, right? Sometimes sales sells ahead of, when you're fully ready, which is fine because we're trying to build up the demand. But I still need to determine like where do I expend the resources in the right way so that we maximize value and revenue for essentially our shareholders. I mean, that's really what ultimately, it comes down to for the business.
I love that last point you just made because you are thinking like a capital allocator. You're thinking like a CEO when you help make decisions like that. So, and that's a good lesson for all of us who have come up through the CS services ranks. Like every ounce of time we put into a customer is actually capital that's getting invested. So I love that point. David, you had your hand raised. Why don't you come off mute and
Yeah, first of all, Chad, thank you. This has been great conversation. Just out of curiosity, you mentioned, and maybe I missed the exact mechanics of it, but you mentioned that you kind of shifted from a traditional CSM to the TAM. Was that before you got there, or was that after you got there? And were there people that made that transition and others who didn't, or did you just completely turn over the team? Like, talk a little bit about that move.
Yeah, so the transition was starting before I joined. It was definitely a recognition that more technical CSM was needed. And I think that that transition is still ongoing. And I think that, what we've worked on is the people that maybe were not as technical, thinking about like how best to support them and how to enable them. And to also think about, I always think about in terms of people's career, like how can I maximize those person's talent and put them into the right role to make sure that they're providing the most value, and also personally, like how are they feeling fulfilled? So I think it's an ongoing transition, but it's part of a fast-growing business and making those changes on the fly.
So just to confirm, so some people have been making that transition, others either are getting enabled to do it or you'll manage out of the business.
Or we'll put them into different roles. Yeah, these are not easy things, right? And so, we have to make the right decisions for the business. But again, I'm trying to make sure that everyone makes that transition.
awesome. Carrie, Why don't you come off mute?
Yeah, hey, thanks for your presentation. It was really interesting. I might have missed this the way you said this, but was I correct to hear that the FDEs actually sat on a different team within the engineering organization?
They sit with under the engineering organization
Okay.
today. Yeah.
And then how do you guys make the decision then, because you're always fighting for resources across functions. How do you, from your point of view, work with that team to say, I need to get one of these FDEs helping me with my customers?
Yeah, not the easiest. There is someone that yeah, it's no, listen, it's all hard. We're all like every company, you're all vying for resources. And especially the sales teams, like I want this person on this project, and I want this person on. And so there's someone that runs that group, and they make decisions around that, and then we do the best that we can. That's really what it comes down to.
Awesome. Hey, Shirley, I know you had your hand raised. I want to give you a chance if you still wanted to ask a question.
I did. I do need to jump. It's kind of to you, Jay, as well as to Chad, because I'm super interested in what you both think on this. There's an awful lot of noise on LinkedIn about FDE right now, right? I think there's a lot of angst as well from a customer success perspective. Everything, Chad, sounds fantastic, super fast company, bleeding edge technology, all of that kind of stuff. But the reality of where a lot of people are sitting right now is not there. So I'm just kind of interested to know, is this the start of something, or is this something that is almost, I would say, like a little bit niche at the moment? I'm just keen to know what you're thinking looking ahead.
I don't think it's niche in the sense that there's a lot of growth in native AI companies. And so I do think there's a bigger gap that's forming between traditional SaaS and native AI companies. And I think they're operating differently. I don't think native AI companies will operate like this longer term. Like I think that I think what I'm seeing is that there's a shift in these companies, native AI companies, where the CSM is becoming more technical. And so that is a shift that's happening. How this all plays out into the future between there's not going to be native AI companies, right? It's just going to be AI companies or not AI companies. They're just going to be tech companies, and AI is just a
Right.
core component of all of them. But I do think that this more technical bent to a CSM is probably here to stay, and it's something that people should be thinking about as they morph in their careers in this space.
Yeah, my perspective on it, Shirley, is that the constraint that we've always had in the software industry was the actual engineering of software. And now that constraint has been obliterated by coding agents. And so now that we can produce products so much more quickly, and have basically democratized the ability to do it as well, it still has to be engineered, right? It still has to be secure, scalable, safe, private, all those things. But the constraints are now moving to other parts of the organization. And really, I think a big part of it is on the customer enablement and productization side of things, commercialization of those products. So I think that I agree, Chad. I think this shift is here to stay permanently. But it's a good thing. Sean, last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Appreciate everybody's engagement. This has been a really fun conversation. Can you hear us, Sean?
Yeah. Hey, Jay. Yeah, thanks for the discussion this morning. Really enjoyed all your input, Chad. Just a real quick question, and apologies, this is something you touched on in the beginning of the conversation. I was just wrapping up a meeting earlier. I'm just curious on how you've approached building a company brain or a second brain, since there's been a lot of discussion around we need to ramp team members fast, right? All of the other tools around our teams have helped increase velocity, but what about decision making? What about institutionalizing knowledge, right? How do we get people to drive value as fast as possible instead of taking months? Now we need to take weeks. I'm curious if you've built something like this, or are you building something, or how you're approaching this with the rest of your peers within the go-to-market organization.
Yeah, it's a whole other discussion, I'd say. But one thing we now have like an AI operations person that essentially built that. Like we put all these skills together. People can access them. It pulls sources from Slack and from all these other different places, and you can literally like ask it questions and get answers. The other thing is that we're all using Cursor, and so we use Cursor to get our product questions answered, and that's how somehow we can bypass the product engineering team. So yeah, it moves very, very fast here. And we have to put those types of things in place.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree. It's a much larger discussion. And my main focus is kind of how do you create that loop of recursive learning within that system, right? So as people are doing their work, the system continues to learn without you having to make a conscious effort to, hey, let's plug in this, tranche of knowledge that we just learned this week, right?
Yeah, everybody is set up on Cursor on Claude in a certain way, and then that way they can access that information and ask questions, and they're working off the same like sources of data, and then those bots they go through Slack and they pull that information in and they update them, and that still doesn't suffice. Like people have questions that doesn't answer well, but at
Sure.
least it helps with some of it.
Got it. Great. Thanks, Chad. Congrats on your continued success there. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean.
Awesome. Okay, we're out of time. Chad, if folks want to find you to ask more questions, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Also, I have my site, strategiccustomersuccess.com. But yeah, it was great. Thanks so much, Jay, and thanks for everyone. It was great discussion.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chad. Appreciate your time. Great to see everybody.
Yeah, thanks,
We'll
Sean.
see you again soon. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.